the American school is not what Bruce Goff or Herb Greene called the school at that time, but I think it's a description that's very fitting because that school was uniquely American in its approach. And it was responding to the unique context of America. And it really was the only place in America that was doing that. Everyone else was following European models. So it truly is the American school because it had an American spirit of this individual aspiration and freedom. I felt that it was really important to document what Uncle Herb remembered, what he experienced, what he felt, what his ideas were before he wouldn't be able to share them in his own words, in his own voice. Making this film has only kind of enhanced the awe that I feel towards Uncle Herb in a way, just as a creative individual, as a visionary. But then I also feel, this admiration and love for him just as someone that is like a father to me, someone that is my mentor and my kind of my North Star. It has brought so much more opportunity for us to work in a different avenue. Uncle Herb went to Oklahoma because he saw a publication in 1948 that was published by Architectural Forum on Bruce Goff. He was going to school in Syracuse, New York, and the pedagogy there was very typical of the time, which was to look at international style architecture. This is architecture coming from Europe, part of the Bauhaus movement, post World War II type of ideology, looking at simplicity, looking at stripping architecture down, but being very severe about it in the sense that there was nothing being taught beyond that. And he, as someone who had these origins of wanting to express something more personal, internal, deeper, he was not happy there. And by wonderful chance, this publication did this article called Pride of the Prairie. And Bruce Goff was the pride of the prairie. And Uncle Herb, like many other young architects around the country and around the world, immediately went to Oklahoma to go and learn under Bruce Goff because they saw this is something special. The term organic architecture is going to immediately be somewhat mysterious, especially because of the word organic and the way that we use it in so many different scenarios now. There's organic food and organic, clothing, and but organic architecture is a complex, all-encompassing approach to architecture. It's not a style. And that's what makes it difficult to understand. Usually, when we talk about architecture and we name it, we are referring to a style. Is it Gothic? Is it Art Deco? Is it Beaux-Arts? And what's difficult about organic architecture is that there isn't an agreed upon definition. And I think the reason that is because it varies. It needs to be a response to the unique conditions of a site, and it's the people who are going to inhabit that architecture. That for Uncle Herb especially, he put this layer that was so important to him, where the history of that region is really important to recall. And something that he also describes as the existential qualities of a person, to draw those out so that you end up with something that's incredibly unique, just like each one of us is unique. But that requires a certain rigor and sensitivity and care that, it takes a lot. It takes an artist to really look carefully and then go all out, to try and draw that out, to connect with particularly nature. And once you connect with nature and pay attention to what fits in to what is working with nature instead of trying to control nature or impose on it, then you're already off to a good start to be a very sustainable project, to be, a project that's in harmony. When I was in architecture school, and it was in that freshman year where we were in a structures class, and the professor is putting up all these different slides of construction types. And he said, there's steel, and here's an example of steel, and there's glass, and here's how you can use glass. And then there's wood, and here's how you can use wood. Here's one house that's made, is a great example of wood construction. And up comes the Prairie house. And they weren't like great photos or anything. They were black and white. And I think it even said by Herb Greene. And I was like, oh, okay. There's Uncle Herb's house here in my class. And so, but the professor went on, didn't say anything else about it. So it actually wasn't until I had graduated from school and was working as a young architect in a firm where the designers of this fancy pants firm come over to my desk. I don't know how they found out Herb Greene was my uncle, but they come over with this massive book. It was by Phaedon. It was like the Atlas of Architecture, around the world. And, opens up this book in front of me, slams it on my desk and said, "You're Herb Greene's niece?" And I said, "Yes." And it was a picture of the Prairie house, this huge, beautiful picture. And they said, "Do you know how important he is? Do you know how important his work is?" And I think they said, like, "Did you have any idea?" And I was like, of course. But I actually didn't know to that level of passion that people were reacting to his work. And I realized that I had been underestimating and not appreciating, not paying attention to what he had truly accomplished. And it was at that moment that I said, he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth, but his work means a lot. And I need to do something about this. I had been hearing Uncle Herb talk about the Prairie house. I'd seen a lot of photos of the Prairie house and had heard other people talk a lot about it before I ever went in to see it. And by the time I was able to visit, I think this was 2016, was the first time. So, not that long ago, just 8 years ago. And I walk in and there I am, with Uncle Herb, and all these kind of memories of what I had heard of came rushing toward me. And yet it was still a blur compared to what the experience was of being there with him. And you walk in and you immediately feel this sense of yourself, actually. And part of that is because of the warmth, the feeling that's captured in the shape of the house, all the texture in the house, the very strong cedar smell that exudes from the walls. So you have this really intense sensory experience. The way that the light comes in, it's all curated in such a way where you can appreciate something internal and also external together. So, it's every time I go into the house, there are aspects of that come out. And it is very moving. It is why women would visit and often, have tears in their eyes, because you do feel like something that's not, you can't really describe, and so it just kind of moves you to tears. Uncle Herb's interest in philosophy is goes hand in hand with how he has designed, how he sees the world, how he designs, how he paints, and they all can seem kind of like their own subjects, but he's able to really integrate them. And part of that is because of the grounding philosophy for him is based on different philosophers, but really the most central is Alfred North Whitehead. Uncle Herb has this appreciation for Whitehead's interpretation of the complexity of the universe and the interconnectedness between one event and another event, or how our perception of the world is informed by this history and this like extensiveness that we can't even fully comprehend, but it's somehow there. And so that is like a kind of very basic description of that philosophical background that he comes from. And you see it in the architecture where he's kind of drawing out all those pieces, and in the paintings. And they were always like, both the paintings and the architecture are exercises of the same philosophy. I think organic architecture has been kind of cast aside. It had this initial flourishing, but the organic architecture approach that came out of the University of Oklahoma in the 40s and 50s and early 60s was not being well understood, and it was so out of the status quo that it needed to be diminished in order for it to be ignored, because it was not coming from the maybe expected avant-garde hubs of thought, East Coast, West Coast, Chicago. It was coming from an unusual place, the heart, the heart of the country. I think that it's been misunderstood because it hasn't been looked at carefully. I asked Uncle Herb recently, how can you tell if a building is an organic architecture building? And he said, well, you have to look carefully and know what you're looking at. What is it connected to? And so I think that the fact that we haven't been learning about Bruce Goff in schools, a lot of architects don't know who Bruce Goff is, let alone Herb Greene. And the problem with that is that their way of thinking offers these other dimensions to approach architecture, that architecture can be much more than just a shell for us to inhabit, that it actually can transcend our experience, and that it actually can be something that's visible, a visible interpretation of our inner feelings and thoughts and hopes and aspirations. And so I think that it's unfortunate for organic architecture to have been misunderstood and cast aside in favor of kind of more international modernist. And it's too bad that happened, because we find ourselves now, decades later, after this post-World War II approach of repetition, of just simplifying things as much as possible, ignoring the site around you. I think we're wondering, what have we done wrong? Why are we having problems environmentally? And I think it's not that you can't design an international style building sensitively, but it's that when we look at anything in life through a very purist interpretation, you're missing out on all the other possibilities. So, so I think that when the Ford House by Bruce Goff was described as being below contempt by Philip Johnson, in comparison to the Farnsworth House, which is this like pristine glass rectangle, below contempt. Why? It's this beautiful, incredible house. And so I think, there are these examples like that where the work was sort of minimized. Bruce Goff was called the Michelangelo of kitsch. The Prairie House was, described as a demon on a permanent high. And I think, it's because the work looks different and it's unusual. And it's not uncommon that when we see something unusual and different that we don't understand, and if we don't make an effort to try and understand it, then we attack it or we ignore it. And so that's very sad to me. And that has a lot to do with why I'm making this film, is to show what organic architecture had and continues to offer. Uncle Herb kind of rose to this fame because of the Prairie House really early in his career. He was early 30s. It's very, very young. He was a baby, but he had this, incredible fortune and then had done this incredible work. It only was 20 years later that he stopped working altogether in architecture. And this has been a central question for me, is why he stopped working. What were the circumstances around that? Is it tied to the marginalization of the kind of work that he was doing, the misunderstanding of it? Uncle Herb's legacy is continuing to unfold. I think that the world, and myself included, may have thought, the world that knew him, and myself included, may have thought that his legacy kind of stopped. He stopped working. He became kind of this recluse painter. And, so that's where his legacy was left off. He's kind of like in the history books, particularly the Prairie House. It's in the history books, but it's of the past. And what I've discovered is that it's not in the past. It's actually, we've skipped it. And we're now needing to come back to it. It's something that can give us a richer sense of meaning and purpose. So I think that, Uncle Herb's legacy will live on because his ideas are what really matter. And hopefully that legacy can also be the legacy he's manifested through buildings. There aren't a lot of buildings, but the Prairie House is a very important part of his legacy. And my greatest wish is that it survive, as it's undergone so much wear and tear over 6 decades. And trying to restore that is a crucial part of his legacy. And his paintings, which are only beginning to be observed and appreciated. The Prairie House went into a nonprofit almost 3 years ago. And that has been a important development for the house, because it's what's needed is for a nonprofit organization to take over and have a mission of restoring and preserving it. But it's an uphill climb. It's a lot of dedication, resources that are needed. So I would say that at this moment in time, it's uncertain. We've got a small but mighty group of people trying to do what they can to raise awareness, to create a coalition, and we need to grow that coalition. And we're, needing a lot of support. It's going to be continue to be a big effort. but but through these different platforms, like the exhibition currently, at Oklahoma Contemporary on the American school that came to California, this film, continued sort of publication of the work and importance of it. It's a touchstone of American organic architecture, even for architects in Hungary, who looked at this as a model for launching an entire movement of design over there, called living architecture. So, I think it's important that we just continue to grow that coalition and try to save the house. I know that nothing's forever, and life is temporary. Our experiences are temporary, and so I try not to think too much about how one day, Uncle Herb won't be here. But I guess what I'm doing is preparing for that. Even though I try not to think about it, and I don't, otherwise it's painful. I mean, the loss for me will be really profound, um, because he has become so central in my life. But I think that I will feel, I hope, and I believe that I'm going to feel satisfied that I paid close attention to him, while he was still here, while he still could share his words and his voice and his work and his jokes with me. So what do we have except our memories eventually, and in his case, and I feel those who also are interested in his work get to be able to continue to look at it, hopefully experience it in person, by going and visiting the incredible buildings that he's designed. So, I think we'll always feel Uncle Herb as we remember his ideas, as we explore them and have them inform us in our own way. That's he's changed my life. Bruce Goff changed his life, and he's my Bruce Goff. So, and everything we do, hopefully, then somebody will find that inspirational. Herb Greene is my uncle, and he's this visionary, and he's inspired so many people. Who am I? What am I doing? What are my strengths? I feel like somehow, in the magic of the way the universe sometimes works, is that as Herb Greene's great niece, maybe I'll actually physically manifest one of his unrealized pieces of legacy. Understanding the through line of Uncle Herb's work, because there are these big buckets in his work. There's the built architecture work, there's the collage paintings, and then there's this public art space called Armature. And so there are three big buckets, but the underlying vibe to all of it is an openness and appreciation of a individual and collective history. The film is it's sort of on its last lap. We've been kind of straddling editing and the last bits of filming for a number of months, and that will continue. So the big hope is to be able to pull all the pieces together, to complete this by the summer of 2025. The working title is Remembering the Future with Herb Greene.